يحلفون بالله ما قالوا ولقد قالوا كلمة الكفر وكفروا بعد إسلامهم وهموا بما لم ينالوا وما نقموا إلا أن أغناهم الله ورسوله من فضله فإن يتوبوا يك خيرا لهم وإن يتولوا يعذبهم الله عذابا أليما في الدنيا والآخرة وما لهم في الأرض من ولي ولا نصير.
They swear by Allah that they said nothing blasphemous, whereas they indeed blasphemed, and fell into unbelief after believing, and also had evil designs which they could not carry into effect. They are spiteful against Muslims for no other reason than that Allah and His Messenger have enriched them through His bounty. So, if they repent, it will be to their own good. But if they turn away, Allah will sternly punish them in this world and in the hereafter. None in the world will be able to protect or help them.
83. We cannot say with certainty what that word of disbelief was which they had uttered. There are, however, traditions that mention several things of unbelief which were uttered by the hypocrites during that time. For instance, it is related that a hypocrite, while he was talking to a young Muslim, a near relative of his, said, "If all that this man," referring to the Prophet, "is saying be true, then we are worse than donkeys." Another tradition relates that when, during the expedition to Tabuk, one of the she-camels of the Prophet went astray and the Muslims were moving about in search of it, a party of the hypocrites made a good deal of fun of this, saying to one another, "Just consider the prophethood of this man. He tells news of heavens, but cannot tell where his she-camel is." 84. This is a reference to the plots which the hypocrites had made during the Tabuk expedition. On the return journey they conspired to push the Prophet down into some ravine, while he would be passing over some hill at night. The Prophet got wind of the plot, and ordered that the army should take the longer route through the valley round the hills, while he himself along with Ammar bin Yasir and Huzaifa bin Yaman would make the short route over the hill. While they were on the way, suddenly they discovered that a dozen of the hypocrites, with covered faces, were following them. At this Huzaifa turned towards them so that he may drive away their camels, but they were terrified when they saw him coming towards them and took to flight lest they should be recognized. The other plot was to declare Abdullah bin Ubay as king at Al-Madinah as soon as they should hear some bad news about the Muslim army, because according to their expectations, the Prophet and his faithful companions could never fare well against the armies of the great Roman Empire. 85. This is an insinuation to put to shame by an indirect suggestion the hypocrites of Al-Madinah. This referee to the prosperity of Al-Madinah and its peoples, for Al-Madinah was a small town before the migration of the Prophet to it, and its two clans Aus and Khazraj did not hold any high position in regards to wealth or prestige. But within the short period of 9 years or so, this small town became the capital of Arabia because of the residence of the Prophet and the sacrifices of the Ansar, the true Muslims, as a result of which, the former peasants Aus and Khazraj of Al-Madinah became the great ones of the Islamic State, and wealth began to flow into this central city on account of spoils of war and increased commercial activity. The hypocrites were rebuked in this verse that, instead of being grateful to the Prophet, they showed anger and spite against him for no other reason than that he had brought forth prosperity among them.
وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ عَاهَدَ اللَّهَ لَئِنْ آتَانَا مِنْ فَضْلِهِ لَنَصَّدَّقَنَّ وَلَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ.
some of them made a covenant with Allah. If Allah gives us out of His bounty, we will give alms and act righteously.
فَلَمَّا آتَاهُم مِّن فَضْلِهِ بَخِلُوا بِهِ وَتَوَلَّوْا وَهُم مُعْرِضُونَ.
Then, when He gave them out of His bounty, they grew niggardly and turned their backs upon their covenant.
86. This is an instance of their ingratitude for which the hypocrites were rebuked in Ayah 74. They broke their covenant with Allah, which enjoined them to spend money in charity, if Allah enriched them by His bounty. This shows that they were confirmed criminals, and they did not care in the least for the agreements they made, and were niggardly and had no moral code to observe.
فأعقبهم نفاقا في قلوبهم إلى يوم يلقونه بما أخلفوا الله ما وعدوه وبما كانوا يكذبون.
So He caused hypocrisy to take root in their hearts, and to remain therein until the day they meet Him, because they broke their promise with Allah, and because they lied.
أَلَمْ يَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ سِرَّهُمْ وَنَجْوَاهُمْ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَّامُ الْغُيُوبِ.
Are they not aware that Allah knows what they conceal and what they secretly discuss, and that Allah has full knowledge even of all that is beyond the reach of perception?
الذين يلمزون المطوعين من المؤمنين في الصدقات والذين لا يجدون إلا جهدهم فيسخرون منهم سخر الله منهم ولهم عذاب أليم.
He also knows the rich that are niggardly, who taught the believers that voluntarily give alms. They scoff at those who have nothing to give except what they earn through their hard toil. Allah scoffs at them in return. A grievous chastisement awaits them.
87. This refers to the mean conduct which the hypocrites evinced on the occasion of the appeal of the Prophet for contributions towards the Tabuk expedition. The well-to-do hypocrites did not themselves make any contributions, but when the sincere Muslims came forward with generous contributions according to their means, they began to deride them. If a well-to-do Muslim made a handsome contribution, they would at once accuse him to be guilty of a show-off. On the other hand, if a poor Muslim contributed a paltry sum which he could hardly spare after sacrificing some of the barest necessities of his family, or contributing the small earnings obtained by hard work, they would at once ridicule, saying, "Lo! Here is the farthing that will help conquer the forts of the Roman Empire."
استغفر لهم أو لا تستغفر لهم إن تستغفر لهم 70 مرة فلن يغفر الله لهم ذلك بأنهم كفروا بالله ورسوله والله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين.
O Prophet, it is all the same whether or not you ask for their forgiveness. Even if you were to ask forgiveness for them 70 times, Allah shall not forgive them. That is because they disbelieved in Allah and His Messenger, and Allah does not bestow His guidance on such evil-doing folk.
فرح المخلفون بمقعدهم خلاف رسول الله وكرهوا أن يجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم في سبيل الله وقالوا لا تنفروا في الحر قل نار جهنم أشد حرا لو كانوا يفقهون.
Those who were allowed to stay behind rejoiced at remaining behind and not accompanying the Messenger of Allah. They were averse to striving in the way of Allah with their belongings and their lives, and told others, "Do not go forth in this fierce heat." Tell them, the hell is far fiercer in heat. Would that they understand.
فَلْيَضْحَكُوا قَلِيلًا وَلْيَبْكُوا كَثِيرًا جَزَاءً بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ.
Let them then laugh little and weep much at the contemplation of the punishment for the evil they have committed.
فَإِنْ رَجَعَكَ اللَّهُ إِلَى طَائِفَةٍ مِّنْهُمْ فَاسْتَأْذَنُوكَ لِلْخُرُوجِ فَقُلْ لَنْ تَخْرُجُوا مَعِيَ أَبَدًا وَلَنْ تُقَاتِلُوا مَعِيَ عَدُوًّا إِنَّكُمْ رَضِيتُمْ بِالْقُعُودِ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ فَاقْعُدُوا مَعَ الْخَالِفِينَ.
Then, if Allah brings you face to face with a party of them, and they ask your leave to go forth to fight in the way of Allah, tell them, "You shall not go forth with me, and shall never fight against any enemy along with me. You were well pleased to remain at home the first time, so now continue to remain with those who have stayed behind."
ولا تصل على أحد منهم مات أبدا ولا تقم على قبره إنهم كفروا بالله ورسوله وماتوا وهم فاسقون.
Do not ever pray over any of them who dies, nor stand over his grave. They disbelieved in Allah and His Messenger and died in iniquity.
88. This verse was sent down to prevent the Prophet from saying funeral prayers for Abdullah bin Ubay, the ringleader of the hypocrites, who died a short while after the Tabuk expedition. His son Abdullah, who was a sincere Muslim, called on the Prophet and requested him to give his shirt for his father's shroud. The Prophet very generously granted his request. Then he begged the Prophet to lead his father's funeral prayer. The Prophet agreed to this also, but Umar very respectfully requested him repeatedly not to do so, saying, "O Prophet of Allah, will you say funeral prayer for a person who was guilty of such and such crimes and sins?" The Prophet, who was a blessing both for friends and for foes, got ready to say funeral prayer even for that man who was a deadly enemy of Islam. At last, when he stood up to lead the funeral prayer, this verse was sent down to prevent him from this by a direct command from God, in accordance with the changed policy declared in Ayah 73, which forbade to do anything that might encourage the hypocrites among the Muslims. The above incident led to the formulation of the regulation that the leaders and prominent people from among the Muslims should neither lead nor offer the funeral prayers of the sinners against Islam, or for those notorious for their disobedience to Islam. After this, whenever a request was made to the Prophet for a funeral prayer, he would first inquire about the conduct of the deceased person. If he came to know that he was a bad person, he would say to his people, "You may perform his burial just as you like."
ولا تعجبك أموالهم وأولادهم إنما يريد الله أن يعذبهم بها في الدنيا وتزهق أنفسهم وتزهق أنفسهم وهم كافرون.
Let not their riches or their children excite your admiration. Through these, Allah seeks to chastise them in this world, and that their lives will depart them while they are unbelievers.
وَإِذَا أُنزِلَتْ سُورَةٌ أَنْ آمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَجَاهِدُوا مَعَ رَسُولِهِ اسْتَأْذَنَكَ أُولُو الطَّوْلِ مِنْهُمْ وَقَالُوا ذَرْنَا نَكُنْ مَعَ الْقَاعِدِينَ.
And whenever any surah is revealed enjoining, believe in Allah and strive in His way along with His messenger, the affluent among them asked you to excuse them, saying, leave us with those who will sit back at home.
رضوا بأن يكونوا مع الخوالف وطبع على قلوبهم فهم لا يفقهون.
They were content to stay behind with the women folk. Their hearts were sealed, leaving them bereft of understanding.
89. They do not understand, for they deliberately and intentionally chose the shameful way of staying at home with women, when they were required to go forth for jihad, though they were healthy, physically fit and well-to-do, and professed Islam. Therefore, according to the divine law of nature, a seal was set upon their hearts and they were bereft of those noble feelings which make one feel ashamed of adopting such a disgraceful conduct.
لكن الرسول والذين آمنوا معه جاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم وأولئك لهم الخيرات وأولئك هم المفلحون.
But the messenger and those who shared his faith strove with their belongings and their lives. It is they who shall have all kinds of good. It is they who shall prosper.
أعد الله لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها ذلك الفوز العظيم.
Allah has prepared for them gardens beneath which rivers flow. There shall they abide. That is the supreme triumph.
وَجَاءَ الْمُعَذِّرُونَ مِنَ الْأَعْرَابِ لِيُؤْذَنَ لَهُمْ وَقَعَدَ الَّذِينَ كَذَبُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ سَيُصِيبُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ.
Many of the Bedouin Arabs came with excuses, seeking leave to stay behind. Thus, those who were false to Allah and His Messenger in their covenant remained behind. A painful chastisement shall befall those of them that disbelieved.
90. Here the word Bedouins refers to those Arabs who lived in the desert near Al-Madinah. 91. The hypocritical profession of Islam has been called the way of unbelief, because that profession of faith which lacks practical proof, surrender, sincerity and obedience is in fact unbelief. As such persons prefer their own interests and worldly desires to Allah and His way, they shall be dealt with by Allah as unbelievers and rebels, even if they could not be legally treated as such in this world, but were considered Muslims due to their profession of faith. This is because in the life of this world, the Islamic law treats as unbelievers only such hypocrites as are guilty of open unbelief, rebellion, treachery, or infidelity. That is why there are many cases of hypocrisy that do not come under cover in the Islamic Sharia. However, this does not mean that if one escaped the penalty according to the Islamic code, one will escape punishment according to the divine judgment also.
ليس على الضعفاء ولا على المرضى ولا على الذين لا يجدون ما ينفقون ينفقون حرج إذا نصحوا لله ورسوله ما على المحسنين من سبيل والله غفور رحيم.
There is no blame on the weak, nor on the sick, nor on those who have nothing to enable them to join the struggle in the way of Allah, if they stay behind, provided that they are sincere to Allah and to His Messenger. There is no cause for reproach against those who do good. Allah is all forgiving, ever merciful.
2. This implies that even those people who are otherwise excusable because of disability, sickness or indigence will be pardoned only if they are sincerely and truly faithful to Allah and His Messenger. Without this fidelity, no one shall be pardoned merely because he was sick or indigent at the time when he was called upon to go forth for jihad. For Allah does not judge merely by appearances, and treats alike, and forgives all those who present medical certificates of their disability because of sickness, old age or some other physical defect. On the Day of Judgment, He will examine minutely the heart of each and every one, and take into account his whole conduct, open and hidden, and will consider whether his excuse was of a faithful servant or of a traitor and rebel. It is obvious that each and every case, in spite of apparent similarity, requires a separate and different judgment. For instance, let us take the case of two men who suddenly fell ill on the eve of jihad. One of them thanked his lucky stars for the timely disease, as if to say, "How lucky it is that I have fallen ill on the opportune moment. Otherwise, this calamity of jihad could not have been avoided and I would have had to suffer it anyhow." On the contrary, the other man was filled with sorrow at his illness, and he cried in anguish, "Ah, what a bad luck! I have been attacked by the sudden disease at the time when I ought to have been on the battlefield instead of lying down here in bed." One of them made his illness not only an excuse for exemption from jihad but also tried to dissuade others from it. On the contrary, the other one, though lying in the bed, went on urging his own dear relatives, friends, and others to go forth to jihad. Nay, he entreated even those who were attending him, saying, "Leave me in the care of the real master, and go forth to jihad. I am sure that the arrangements for my nursing would be made somehow. Therefore, you should not waste your precious chance for my sake, but go forth and serve the right way." But the other, who stayed at home, spent all this time in spreading discontent and bad news, and in damaging war efforts, and in disrupting the affairs of the families of the fighters. The other man in similar circumstances did his very best to make the home front as strong as he could. Though these two men had similar excuses for exemption, they cannot be considered as equal in the sight of Allah. The second one only may expect Allah's pardon, and not the first man who was a traitor and rebel against Allah, though he might have had a genuine excuse for exemption.
ولا على الذين إذا ما أتوك لتحملهم قلت لا أجد ما أحملكم عليه تولوا وأعينهم تفيض من الدمع حزنا ألا يجدوا ما ينفقون.
Nor can there be any cause for reproach against those who, when they came to you asking for mounts to go to the battlefront, and when you said that you had no mounts for them, they went back, their eyes overflowing with tears, grieving that they had no resources to enable them to take part in fighting.
93. Such people as felt a strong urge for jihad but could not join it because of some really genuine excuse, will be counted by Allah among those who actually took part in it, even though they could not join it in person and do anything practically for it. This is because they were sincerely grieved at their absence from jihad for no fault of theirs. Just as a man of the world would be grieved if he were deprived of some lucrative business or of some high profit, Allah considers such a one as on duty, because his heart was serving in the way of Allah, though he had been deprived of active service on account of some genuine excuse. The Prophet, while returning from Tabuk, stated the same thing like this. There are some people at Al-Madinah who have been traveling and marching all along with you through every valley. Naturally, the companions to whom he was speaking were wonderstruck at this. So they asked, while staying at Al-Madinah? He replied, yes, while staying at Al-Madinah. This is because they were compelled by the circumstances to stay behind at Al-Madinah, otherwise they would certainly have accompanied you.
إنما السبيل على الذين يستأذنونك وهم أغنياء رضوا بأن يكونوا مع الخوالف وطبع الله على قلوبهم فهم لا يعلمون.
But there are grounds for reproach against those who seek leave to stay behind, even though they are affluent. They are the ones who are content to be with the womenfolk who stay behind. Allah has set a seal on their hearts, leaving them bereft of understanding.
يعتذرون إليكم إذا رجعتم إليهم قل لا تعتذروا لن نؤمن لكم قد نبأنا الله من أخباركم وسيرى الله عملكم ورسوله ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون.
They will put up excuses before you when you return to them. Tell them, make no excuses. We will not believe you. Allah has already informed us of the truth about you. Allah will observe your conduct, and so will His Messenger. Then you will be brought back to Him who knows alike what lies beyond perception and what lies in the range of perception, and will let you know what you have done.
سيحلفون بالله لكم إذا انقلبتم إليهم لتعرضوا عنهم فأعرضوا عنهم إنهم رجس ومأواهم جهنم جزاء بما كانوا يكسبون.
When you return to them, they will surely swear to you in the name of Allah that you may leave them alone. So do leave them alone. They are unclean. Hell shall be their home, a recompense for what they did.
(94) The Arabic words are of the same root, but have different senses in the two sentences in which they occur. In the first sentence it means, you may turn away from them and forbear them and may not take them to task. In the second sentence it means, so turn away from them and break off all connections with them and have nothing to do with them, as if you had broken off completely with them, and they with you.
يحلفون لكم لترضوا عنهم فإن ترضوا عنهم فإن الله لا يرضى عن القوم الفاسقين.
They will swear to you in order to please you, but even if you become pleased with them, Allah will not be pleased for such an evil-doing folk.
الأعراب أشد كفرا ونفاقا وأجدر ألا يعلموا حدود ما أنزل الله على رسوله والله عليم حكيم.
The Bedouin Arabs surpass all in unbelief and hypocrisy, and are most likely to be unaware of the limits prescribed by Allah in what He has revealed to His Messenger. Allah is all-knowing, all-wise.
95. As has already been stated earlier, the Bedouins here refers to those rustic Arabs of the desert who had settled in the suburbs of Al-Madinah. The background which may help one to comprehend the meanings of the verse is this. Though these people had outwardly embraced Islam, they had not done so from conviction. When they saw the rising of the organized power of Islam in Al-Madinah, they were so overawed by it that they could not ignore it. So at first they adopted the attitude of the opportunists towards the conflict between Islam and Kufr. But when the power of the Islamic government spread over the major portions of Hijaz and Najd, and the power of its enemy clans began to decline, they thought it expedient to enter the fold of Islam. But there were very few among them who had sincerely accepted Islam from the conviction that it was the right way. That is why they did not make any sincere efforts to fulfill the implications of the true faith, and observe the obligatory duties imposed by Islam. On the contrary, the majority of them had accepted Islam just because it was the best policy for them. They merely desired to take advantages of being Muslims in order to gain those benefits to which they were entitled as members of the ruling party, without performing those duties which became obligatory on them by the very acceptance of Islam. Therefore they were utterly averse to saying the prescribed prayers, observing the fasting, paying the zakat dues from their date palm gardens and their herds of cattle. Moreover, they smarted under the discipline of the Islamic State and resented being subdued by any power for the first time in history.
Above all, it was against their very nature to make sacrifices of their lives and wealth in the way of Allah, as was being demanded by Islam, for they were accustomed to fight only for plunder and spoils. That is why they always invented one excuse or the other for exemption from the restrictions and obligations that were being imposed on them. For they had no interest in the truth or the welfare of humanity. Their only concern was their camels and their goats, that is, the narrow world around their tents. As regards anything higher than these, the only thing which they could believe in was irrational reverence for those who would guarantee their worldly welfare and protect them from calamities and give them amulets to safeguard them against harm and evil, and say prayers for them as a recompense for their offerings to them. But they were not prepared to accept any faith or belief that would bring under its moral and legal discipline every aspect of their cultural, social and economic life, and demand from them the sacrifices of lives and wealth for the cause of a universal reform. In this verse, the above-mentioned mental and moral condition of the Bedouins has been described like this. These Bedouins are more hypocritical than the urban Arabs and are more stubborn and obdurate in their denial of the truth. This is because the urban people make use of the opportunities of meeting the learned and pious people and thus learn the laws and regulations of the true way. On the other hand, in all probability, the Bedouins will learn little about the divine way, because they get few opportunities for this. Moreover, they lead lives of economic animals rather than of human beings having moral and spiritual values, therefore they do not think of higher things than their animal urges. It should also be noted that the main cause of the subsequent storms of rebellion and apostasy during the Caliphate of Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, 2 years after the revelation of these verses 97 to 99, was the same that has been mentioned therein.